Welcome to today's webinar, Understand Your Exposure to Risk by Stress Testing Your Business, an introduction. And let me reiterate and stress, this is an introduction to a very, very difficult, elusive issue. The COVID pandemic, I'm sure as you all know, and more than 2 years of dramatic change in the markets for both products and services have alerted business owners to the urgent need to better understand their risks. Tell you a little bit about SCORE. I'm a SCORE mentor. Our goal is to help out small businesses. We provide various services. And we'd be very happy if some of you, as I will suggest, contact us and work with us. This is how this is going to work. You guys are all muted. As we go, please submit text questions and comments using the Q&A. I will try to answer as many questions as I can during the presentation. I would urge you, if I don't get to your questions, or if you think of questions at a later date, do not hesitate to email. That's me. I worked for 35 years on Wall Street. I managed risk, and I've been a SCORE mentor for over 5 years. Okay. The COVID pandemic and more than 2 years of violent change in supply and demand of products and services have alerted business owners and those planning to be business owners the urgent need to measure their risks, to stress test their businesses. Risk management requires careful, pointed research, and more important, risk assessment and management are very challenging. They require serious skills. I hope I introduce you to these skills today. This webinar will hopefully serve as an introduction to stress testing, risk assessment, and risk management. In this webinar, I will cover what is risk, how is risk measured and assessed, and what can you do to learn as much as you can about the risks to which your business is exposed. As some of you may know, stress testing on Wall Street, where I come from, was usually done after the disaster occurred and millions of dollars were lost, supposedly to make sure that the same exact disaster doesn't happen again. In other words, let's lock the barn doors after the horses have run away. I'm sure many of you have experienced some real stress over the last 2 years when COVID stressed many businesses, and ever since, as volatility, violent dramatic changes continue to characterize supply and demand. What risks are you taking, and how well are you being compensated for taking those risks? When do most businesses conduct a stress test or even think about it? Let's be clear. I'm not claiming I can help you survive the next existential threat to your business, as if somehow I know how to make it through the next disaster. I'm not an expert in what has not happened. I can, however, talk to and help you deal with what could be called normal risk, or risks that can be reasonably anticipated and expected. I must point out, however, that what is normally to be expected for one business or industry may not be the same or even close for the same or another business or industry. In other words, when it comes to risk and stress testing, most businesses need to be considered individually. I will discuss later on how each individual business can address its unique risk concerns. So, what is risk other than bad stuff happening and losing money? And if I can't help you with catastrophic risk like COVID, what can I talk about? How can I help at least some of you today? I can try and talk about the changes in your costs and revenues, the risks you will have to deal with. In this webinar, I will suggest and demonstrate ways to stress test your business. I will help you to anticipate what can reasonably be anticipated and so prepare for in advance. The aim is to make your business capable of dealing with change and so hopefully move and become more sustainable. What risks are you taking? I'm asking, what does each individual business owner and planner need to know about the sustainability of their business? As I will show, this is another way of asking, what risks are you taking? How precisely do you understand those risks? And how well are you being compensated for taking those risks? What in fact is risk? A word most people use but few understand in any other sense than bad things happening. Risk is bad, as in going bankrupt or losing money. Let's talk a few moments about risk as a professional manager of risk talks. You see in front of you a highly stylized record of the performance of two stocks. On the left can be company A, and on the right, company B. Two investments. Let's assume for argument's sake that both company A and company B are in the same exact business. Obviously, this is a highly stylized example. As you can see, both stocks double over the course of 1 year, starting out the year at $50 and ending at $100. Pretty good. Both stocks doubled. But as you can see, stock A rose steadily in price. There were no drawdowns or losses of value. Stock B, however, was far more volatile as prices rose and fell, in fact, fell below the purchase price before recovering. In other words, an investor in stock B had to take much more risk, was far more exposed to losses than the investor in stock A. We can also assume that the investor in stock B might have had to decide to take a loss to make the pain stop, make it go away, and to have sold out for a substantial loss, maybe close to $10 a share. So while we can say that both stocks doubled the same exact result, stock A is a much better investment. Stock A offered the same return for far less risk. Risk, as defined by a professional, by a risk manager, is variance, the range of changes that can be expected. What does this mean for you? Is your particular business, your particular industry, more likely to perform like stock A or the more volatile stock B? Is your business more or less volatile? Are your costs and revenues volatile? And if it's more volatile, hence more risky, are you being fairly compensated for the risks you are taking? What risks are worth taking? What kind of changes can you anticipate? I'll talk more about cost, revenues, and especially risk to your profit margin shortly. I'm going to proceed to two stories, a story about supply chain risk and a story about consumer preferences. In other words, welcome to stress testing your business. Welcome to risk management. And when do most businesses and owners discover their risk limit? When they hit it, when they can't take it anymore. The idea is to do it before. Story about the bicycle business. A successful company that sold high-end bicycles, $2,000 and up, usually more than $2,000. When COVID hit, demand for their bicycles soared. They literally did not have enough. They sold out immediately and made more money faster than they ever imagined. Pretty good. In other words, rather than being hurt by the pandemic, or rather than having lost their once fine business, they came up great. So what did they do next? They ordered a lot more bicycles, assuming the surge in demand was permanent, that this change was permanent. But as you can imagine, it was not. Demand collapsed, and they now have a warehouse filled with unsold bicycles that they have to pay for. They need to take a loan and pay the finance costs, but do not have the added income to cover. What's even sadder is that they fully expected and prepared for the supply chain risks and acted aggressively to offset those risks. So you might ask yourself, if there is a surge in demand for your product or service, good, should you dramatically increase your supply and hire more employees? How do you make that decision? So what's the lesson? What can be learned from this story? Is it fair for us to say now with 2020 hindsight that they failed to predict that demand would collapse so soon and that customer behavior would change so dramatically, that customers would quickly and dramatically stop spending their money on high-end bicycles and start spending their money on going out to dinner? Can we be critical now after the fact? Because unlike big chains, the bicycle company, a single product seller, can simply mark down the excess inventory, or better yet, combine losing bicycle sales with other profitable sale items. So what's the lesson? Assuming that there is even a lesson. Tell you another story. As opposed to bicycles, a market for which consumer behavior changed dramatically, consumers of coffee never changed their habits. During the pandemic and even after the pandemic, they never cut back, even as rising inflation has changed some consumer preferences, increasing the demand for cheaper products, lesser quality products. At the same time, the demand for and prices received for coffee have gone up. Sellers of coffee pay more and receive more. As per the Wall Street Journal, the average price of coffee in a quick serve shop rose to $4.90, up 7.6% in the same period of last year. And the cost of brewing at home, a cost easily passed on to the consumer, is up 15.8%. So how can you possibly deal with this? How do you possibly deal with change? How can you know what might happen about consumer preferences or supply chain issues? How can you best prepare? In other words, how can you take and manage appropriate risks? You have in front of you a chart of coffee prices over the last 50 years. Coffee is an exchange-traded commodity, and so price history is published in various sites. You could get it easily. Time is on the x-axis across the bottom from the late 70s through the present. And price is on the right side from 0 to 350. By the way, I don't know if it's $350 a pound or what, because I don't trade coffee and I don't know, and I don't care. What you see in front of you, okay, what can easily be seen from the chart is that the price of coffee swings wildly. The range is from around $50 to over $300 for the standard weight bought and sold. Prices exploded 5 times and crashed 5 times. But what is most interesting is the consistent range, tops and bottoms in the same basic places, around 300, around 50. If I were in the coffee business or thinking of opening a high-end coffee shop, I'd want to be very aware of this history and build what I learned about potential price changes into my financial plan. If I was starting out, I'd want to know if I was coming in on the highs or the lows or somewhere in between. In other words, what risks am I taking? What kind of changes can I expect that I will be exposed to? For those in or thinking of entering the coffee business, this chart provides some sense of what might be expected and so prepared for in advance. More important, in fact, most important, what you all need to understand, this is not a pinpoint forecast of the exact price of coffee at any future time. Rather, it is the range of possibilities based on historical experience and analysis, as opposed to a pinpoint forecast. Range takes uncertainty, which is the big problem. Range takes uncertainty into account. That's the whole idea. It will make what your efforts, your research that I'm going to suggest you do, useful. In other words, it's the potential range of change of costs and revenues, not the average cost or the price or average price received that is useful for planning. In the case of coffee, such wide springs in price, the average price of coffee is meaningless. All right, why am I telling you this? I'm not asking you to explain consumer preferences, consumer behavior, as these two stories, bicycles and coffee. I'm not talking to you as consumers, buyers of bikes or coffee, but I am talking to you as business owners and what you need to know, or at least know something about. If I were in the coffee business or thinking of going into the coffee business, I'd want to know if the prices I'm paying and receiving today are sustainable, how likely they are to change, and by how much. You are all told to know your costs, but are today's costs, today's prices part of a larger trend, up or down? Is there a trend, or rather normal cyclical behavior, up and down in a narrow range? What's the history? What changes can you reasonably expect and build into your financial plan? Let's try and make this more practical for you. Let's talk about profit margins, risk, and stress tests. This is a hypothetical business. The business distributes a product. The all-in cost of the product per item sold is $5, all costs. The product is sold for $10. Profit margin is $5. Pretty good. But if costs increase by 40% to $7, if revenues fall by 20% to $8, and that's a lot, margin remains positive, still making money, not as much, but enough to survive, maybe for now, assuming no change in the volume of sales. Depending on the particular business, are changes of this magnitude typical, normal, or shocking? Should they be expected, or are they unpredictable, impossible to anticipate, especially given the history of the business and the industry? Historical research and analysis, professionally done, might reveal whether or not the changes in this margin are normal, to be expected, or are so extraordinary as to have never been seen before. Historical research does not offer certainty, but history can serve as a guide, an introduction, provide a sense of what might be expected. How good or bad have things ever been in your business, in your industry? This is the kind of research we think you need to do, and we are here to help you do it. I again refer to the coffee chart. Let's take a look at another chart. Cotton, another exchange traded commodity. I chose cotton because many of our clients are considering bringing on a line of clothing to the market. I assume cotton might just be an essential cost. I want to say at the beginning, I know nothing about cotton. I've never traded cotton, no idea. But as you can see, cotton maintained a consistent price range, $25 to $100 for 40 years. If you go left, you'll see the price was between 25 and 100, essentially from the 70s until 2010. Cotton exploded up right after the great financial crisis in 2010, and again after COVID, when prices broke out above 100, in one case going to 200, in the other case going to 150 after COVID. In fact, you could say that the cotton experience looks a lot like the bicycle experience, in which an extreme change, bicycles, cotton, a huge rise in price and demand proved unsustainable. Maybe the lesson, if there is one, when it comes to your business, don't double up in price in bubbles and don't double down in crashes. In other words, know your market. Don't necessarily apply the same rules, the same anticipation of change to cotton as to coffee. Different histories, different behavior, different markets lead to different financial plans. And that's how we will help you. So let's get to the task at hand and the aim of this webinar. What is a practical stress test? What can you do now when times are hopefully okay that will help you deal with what you can reasonably forecast? What can you do? What should you do? A practical stress test takes into account what kind of changes that can within reason be anticipated. Changes in cost, revenues, your prices paid and received, anticipated by learning as much as possible about the range of changes that have already been experienced by your business, your market, and by your industry. A practical stress test for those planning a business must consider if current prices paid and received are likely to change and by how much. Well, I've killed almost a half hour of your day that you can't get back. Let's end with a story a little closer to home. A story told to me by a SCORE colleague who founded several very successful businesses selling products to major retail chains. A supplier of an essential component offered my colleague a 30% discount. A 30% discount for an essential cost can obviously improve profit margin. My colleague and most of the competition took the deal. Everybody took the deal. But here's what happened. The supplier who offered the discount was overwhelmed with orders he could not fulfill. And so many of his customers were stuck without an essential component. Fortunately for my colleague, a second supplier had been lined up, was in place, and so that business was not affected. What does that story mean for you? What's the point? If a supplier offers you a 30% discount in the cost of an essential component, should you increase your order, take full advantage, add to your profit margin? Are there any risks involved? Would you automatically jump at the chance to reduce your costs by 30%? Or should you first consider the risks? Can the supplier provide what you must have? Is the discount sustainable? Should you become totally reliant on that one cheap supplier? Obviously, the answer depends on what you know about the product being supplied to you, the supplier of that essential product, and so the risks you are willing to take. So the answer is, it depends. You might ask, how can I possibly leave you all with the words, it depends? Because it depends on you and what you are willing to do. What can you do in practical terms? What can we at SCORE do for you? Better yet, what can we do with you? Together, we can look at your financials, isolate the essentials. With our help, you can do some serious research, both online and at a business library, such as that in the White Plains Library. Together, we can make a proper risk assessment and conduct a practical stress test, hopefully before anything unmanageable happens. We can pick out the costs and revenues, actual and projected, cost and revenues that are central to your profitability, that determine your margin, cost and revenues that are probably subject to change. We can assist with risk assessment. What range of changes are likely and how will margin be affected? But you have to do your part. You have to do some research online or maybe in a library. You have to provide what now I hope you need to know to learn via research, to have some sense of the range of changes in costs and revenues that you are likely to experience. You may not find charts as clear and neat as coffee or cotton, but you will come up with the information needed to begin a proper and practical stress test. And again, we are here to help. Once you do your part, we together can risk assess your margin, consider the sustainability of current margin, and the likelihood that your financial plan will proceed as you hope. Whether you provide a product or a service, how likely are you to be undersold? And if so, by how much? If you are paying rent, how likely is it that your rent will be raised and by how much? Given the risks that you are taking, are you receiving adequate compensation? None of this is easy, particularly in terms of violent change in supply and demand. Nor will any of your efforts and hard work provide certainty. Risk is never eliminated or controlled. At best, it is properly assessed and adequately managed. We are not pretending to make this easy, but we are here if and when you need help to navigate change, hopefully before change does any real damage. I invite you to call or email and make an appointment. The number is 914-267-6570. I can now take questions if you like. Okay, I do not see any questions. And unless I'm missing them, I appreciate you attending. I try to get you out in and out in a half hour. Okay, well, if you think of any questions, do not hesitate to email me at SCORE. And I hope some of you take up our offer. It was a pleasure. Thank you for attending.